Good morning, rock stars, and welcome back to our Aldebaran Quilt Along. My name is Holly Ann, Knight of String and Story, and it is my job to guide you to quilt with confidence. Y'all, today is extra exciting because unrelated to quilting, today is the first Wednesday after the New York City Marathon, and so many of y'all who are here donated to my race with Breakthrough T1D, and together we raised almost $11,000 for type 1 diabetes research. And y'all, that is huge. So thank you all so much. I know I took the steps on Sunday, but truly y'all carried me all the way across that finish line. So I brought our medal for all of us to admire. Ta-da! Isn't she beautiful? She's absolutely stunning. We love her. Yes, I've been wearing her for several days. Yes, I will continue wearing her. Also, for those of you running nerds, I know I've got a couple here. Susan is here especially. The edge of the medal is the elevation profile of the race. So all those little bumps along the edge, it's all the hills that I ran. And y'all were in my ears cheering for me. So thank you. This was such a fun thing to do. I know I have some emails to play catch up on from being out, but I wanted to just take a moment and say thank you again to each and every one of you who was a part of that fundraiser. It was an absolutely magical weekend. Jennifer says, okay, that's cool. And as one of y'all mentioned, Jennifer said, yes, I did run sub 4 hours, and I am more than a little proud of that. So all that work paid off. All those times that I came in, those of you who are in crew and you know, and we meet on Monday nights, and I come in on Mondays and I am sweaty and nasty on Zoom. And I'm like, it's a good thing that this is Zoom because I've been at the track doing speed work. All of that speed work paid off this weekend. So y'all are awesome. Today, we are going to make string blocks. And I know I don't have my Aldebaran behind me to point at, but we're going to make our little triangle that's all pieced that goes down in the bottom that adds a fun little pop to this block. But before I do that, let me scroll back up to the top. I'm going to actually read some of your comments out loud. Nicole says, good morning to all those who are waiting. I managed to get my triangles cut and arranged on my design wall. Nicole, I'm a little jealous. I cannot wait to arrange my triangles. She said, the blues did not play well together, so I changed the placement. Now the quote will be inspired by Holly Ann. I love that so much. Margot says, as usual, I'm behind, but I'm trying to get all my finished tops quilted, but I'm happy to say I picked out my fabric. Margot, that's a step forward. That's incredible. She also said, I'm happy to say I shopped from my stash. Yes, I love it, Margot. And then we started talking about the marathon. So yeah, it was pretty great. Any of y'all who are runners or fans of the sport, if you have the opportunity to run New York or go spectate New York, John and the boys were in the grandstands, which those tickets are surprisingly affordable. And again, affordable changes in everybody's world, but fat quarter bundle price. They were like $55 a piece. And that was money well spent for our family, for them to be able to be there, and especially for the kids to have designated space. So if not something that is in your interest, in your wheelhouse, in your budget, I would highly recommend it. It was a very, very cool day. They got to see the men's finish. It was a photo finish between two Kenyan teammates. They saw what is probably going to be Eliud Kipchoge's last professional marathon. It was his final sixth star of the Abbott World Majors. Des Linden ran with Anthony Ramos from Hamilton, and John and the boys got to see her finish. It was a cool day. Highly recommend. Okay, I'll stop talking about it now. Maybe we'll see. I might tell stories while we're going. But we're going to piece together. We're going to paper piece. So here, I'll use my pattern as our illustration here, right? So we're going to be making these little stripy triangles today. Let's get my finger pointed in the right spot. These little stripy triangles. And this is literally like baby's first barely introduction to paper piecing, okay? So we're going to be, we cut these strings together on page 3, and then right down at the bottom, it says, piece them together. So let me show you how to do that. Because if you've done some paper piecing or if you've pieced strips together before, it's probably going to be fairly intuitive. But if you haven't, it might feel overwhelming. So what I've done, I got some sandwich paper. This is just like thin deli paper. You could use parchment paper. You could use printer paper. Paper is technically optional, but I got some papers to use as foundations today. And the reason that I like to use these is that when we piece strips together, right, we've cut all these long 21-inch strips out of our fat quarters. If you're working with yardage, you have cut with the fabric strips. So they're long strips, right? And when we go and we piece those together, if we were to piece them across their full length, they're going to start to warp as we go, and they won't actually all be straight. Now we're going to cut these into triangles. You could make an argument like, is it going to be that big of a deal? If it's not that big of a deal to you, don't worry about it. But what I like about this technique is it's going to keep our strips going nice and straight and even. And it's also a really good opportunity to practice paper piecing. So if you're curious about foundation paper piecing, but some of the things folks say about it, that it's, like it's backwards, it's upside down, it's in reverse, it's confusing, right? It's mirror image. If that feels nerve-wracking, this is a great starting place. Those of you that have been a part of Quilting Rockstar University, or you're a part of Free Motion Quilting Academy, or you're a part of Ruler Quilting Academy, you know that whenever I'm teaching you a new skill, one of the things we try to talk about is we talk about how can we bring this skill down to the fewest number of variables, right? What is the simplest version of this that we can do, right? And when we're doing free motion quilting, we talk about spending time doodling so that you can just think about the shapes of the motifs without having to also think about your foot on the pedal and the needle moving up and down and moving the bulk of the fabric. Doodling is the simplest version of free motion quilting, okay? String piecing with a foundation paper is going to be the simplest version of foundation paper piecing. It's a great way to get a feel for what is it like to run fabric and paper under our machines. How do we open those fabrics up? What does it look like where our seams are, right? And there are some things that are a little different from once you're actually making a shape with your foundation paper piecing, but it's going to give you the first little sampling of what's going on. Okay. One of y'all asked, is this being recorded? Yes, this replay will be available immediately following this on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Nicole says every now and then mark a straight line on the paper to keep yourself honest. It does help. That's a great tip, Nicole. I love that. I don't think I've ever done that, but I love that. Especially if you were to be working with long paper. What would be very cool is if you had like paper on the roll and you could actually, do a big long piece. I took 12 by 12 paper and I cut 6.5-inch strips. So we're just going to work with that today. All right. Are we ready? Now, those of you who are on Instagram have a little bit of an advantage because you can see my mat that's in front of me. Those of you that are watching elsewhere, I'm going to do this very annoying thing and I'm going to tilt this down so you can't actually see my face. And I know if any of you are watching in your hard of hearing and seeing my face helps, I recommend go catch the replay over on Instagram, okay? Because if you want to be able to see my face and what I'm doing at the same time, it will make this a lot easier. Now, I'm going to start by just laying out a whole bunch of these little strips. It doesn't really matter what order they're in. There's no real rhyme or wherefore about it. I would consider, making sure you've got some lights and some darks in there so that we don't get too mid-toned. But this does not need to be a repeating pattern or anything like that. It can be like, I'm going to go ahead and throw another blue in here because I just feel like we need some more blue. These are also, I happen to all be using the same width. So let's change some of these out. I'm going to put a wider purple in here. Let's put that. Yeah. And then maybe down here, we'll change this for a wider blue. Okay. And just work your way down till you've got a selection. Okay. So we've got a few to be getting on with. All right. Those of you who are over on Instagram, you can kind of see here too. I just now have kind of a pile of ones that I've fiddled with. All right, then I'm going to take my paper. And I'm going to take my first strip. And we're going to lop the extra off as we get going. But I'm going to take some pins. And I'm going to pin this to the paper. Now, if you are familiar with foundation paper piecing, traditional foundation paper piecing where you are making shapes, okay? You would have a number 1 that would be your starting place. And you would either pin or glue based your fabric in place for that. And here, we're just going to pin baste it, okay? And I'm dropping these pins. I'm actually going to put these pins in like this so that it's easy to get them out. We don't want to stretch as we go. Okay. All right. I'm going to flip y'all up. So now you've been able to see what I did. I'm going to re-explain it one more time where you can see my face. So I laid out a bunch of strips, order color placement, let it be kind of haphazard, pull from your full range of colors. All right. Then we've taken our first foundation paper and I have first pinned that initial fabric down. And then I have pinned my next fabric to it. If you are using prints, you're going to pin these right sides together. Okay, so this would be the wrong side of my fabric facing up here. Okay, I'm using solids, so it doesn't matter. That's another great thing if you're practicing foundation paper piecing for the first time, whether it's with this technique or say you downloaded our free workbook and you're practicing your very first economy block, then you're going to, starting with solids eliminates one of those things you have to worry about. All right. So then we're going to take this and we're going to go over to the machine. Let me turn this so y'all can kind of see my machine over here. Boop, boop. And I'm going to shorten my stitch length a little bit. Not very much because this is really fine paper. And I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. Those original pins, remember I put them parallel with this edge. And you know what? I'm looking at this and I'm already like, are we leaning to one side already? I feel like we may have started off needing to draw a straight line. Because I already feel a little crookedy. It'll be okay. Do like 2 back stitches just to keep everything stable. Okay. And it looks like this. Okay. Pull your pins out because we don't want to accidentally hit them with our scissors in just a second. And then lop off this extra with your scissors. Okay. That simple. All right. Oh, that's interesting, Edith, that you think the view here is better because YouTube and Facebook should be the same, but whichever works for you. All right. From here, we're going to press this open like so. Okay. So now we have right sides facing up. You can hit this with an iron if you want. I'm going to just finger press mine. I might have stretched my, see how my paper's curling? Can y'all see that? That means that I might have stretched my fabric a little bit and it's pulling the paper up. So I want to make sure that as I continue, I'm not accidentally stretching that fabric. One way that we can be careful about that is by actually letting the fabric overlap top and bottom. And we'll trim it on both sides. So that way we're not trying to like pull on it to make it cover the area. Okay. If you are strip piecing these and you're not using paper, you'll want to seriously consider alternating the direction that you're going with your seams, especially if you're sewing all the way down your length of fabric. So if I sewed this way for my first seam, I may want to turn it over and go the other way for my second one. Okay. And that's going to help with some of that warp if you don't have the paper to keep this stable. And yes, Jennifer mentions using a wooden roller just like you could with foundation paper piecing. Do I have mine in my drawer? Let's find out together. Yeah, no, of course mine's not in my drawer. It's probably back in my box labeled foundation paper piecing and I should have gotten it out. But a wooden roller, finger pressing, all of those, you know, if you've got a mini iron that you keep handy, all of those are good options. When you're doing this, I did not back stitch at the top, but it'll be okay. When you're doing this, a perfect 1/4 inch seam is not a huge deal, right? We're just filling this paper together. So keep that in mind. If you were doing foundation paper piecing to make a shape, you would be sewing on the line. You wouldn't be following a seam allowance per se. All right, and same thing. I'm just going to cut this off. If you don't want to cut it as you go, you want to wait and trim it at the end. You totally can. That works. All right. And same thing, press it open. And if you feel like you need to draw a straight line, go for it. It's okay if they're not perfectly even. We're aiming for evenness, but we're doing this for joy units. It's going to get cut into a triangle, okay? Same thing. Try not to stretch it out. Drop those pins in. And we're literally just going to do this all the way down our paper until it is all filled up. I'm pinning through my blue that's hiding back there. Come on. One of the things that I love about this technique is that it gives a job to all that extra fabric we had from our fat quarters, right? Margot mentioned earlier wanting to shop from her stash in the coming year, right? And one of the things that we can be mindful of, whether we're shopping strictly from our stash or we're just seeking to be more mindful about how we use our fabric, is not having a ton of scraps and waste left over after a project that we're not going to use, right? I'm going to plug the iron in so that we can hit this with an iron. Give me just a second. I like to hit it with an iron every once in a while. I think it helps. We're going to see if I have room in my power strip here for an iron. There we go. All right, we'll let that warm up. And so thinking through how we use fabric for our projects and reducing waste, right? And when you cut out a project, could the scraps become your binding? Are there pieces big enough that you could piece together to make part of your backing? Could you make a pillow or a pillowcase that is going to match your quilt? Can you use those extra bits to make the strip piecing that you need for these triangles, right? All of those are things that we need to, keep in mind if we're wanting to reduce our fabric waste. Edith, yes, Instagram is live. You'll click the little circle around my face to find it. It's not going to be in the feed right now. You'll click the little circle with my face in it up at the top. Great question. All right, and we're going to continue on down while my iron heats up. If you have selvages on your strips, this is a great opportunity to just let them hang off the edge and they'll get trimmed off as you go. If you are working on this and you're like, Holly-Ann, that's cute and everything, but there's 0% chance I'm going to have the patience to piece this, then your solution could be to use a striped fabric or to use a contrasting print. Like, let's say you are, if you're piecing this whole thing out of solids, you could pop a triangle of a print in here. We just want this triangle to have a little extra personality, right? Sorry, I just hit my kneecap on my desk because I was sliding too vigorously. Sarah, I trimmed these to be the height of my triangle, and then my paper happens to be 12 inches long. So it's just the size of sandwich paper that I bought. And for those of you that are like really OGs and have been around here for a while, and you remember the very last time that we did an Aldebaran quilt along, which was 2019. Yes, this is the same pack of sandwich paper. It's the sandwich paper that never ends. Susan said, I'm contemplating using a print. Yes, it's so fun to use a print. All right, I'm going to hit these with an iron. It's just going to help them lay down a little bit. Be mindful of whatever type of paper you're using when you iron. Adjust your iron temperature if needed. Okay. See how much flatter those are now? Like, so lovely. All right, and we're going to keep going a little longer. Margaret says, I prefer to trim the strips a bit longer than the paper before sewing it, and then I trim to size after sewing. Love it. Yeah, so you could do, so like what Margot's describing is you could lop this off here right now, like so. And then lay it on. And if that helps you not stretch that fabric, that is a beautiful way to do it. I'm only successfully remembering to back stitch at one side, but that's okay. The back stitching is optional. I just don't want these strings to pull apart while I'm cutting them later, you know? Nicole says today's project is to cut bits of binding from the scraps and sew them together. The rest will go into the applique pile. I love that, Nicole. Yeah, what are all the little ways that we can reduce our waste? We had some binding left over from a quilt this weekend that Adrian quilted, or Adrian bound while I was out of town. And I take those leftover bits of binding and I throw them in my teaching basket for when we have sip and sews here in the shop. And I cut little chunks off and I use those as like little leader enders. Or what was it that someone called it one time? Was it a thread peg? A stitch peg? It was something peg. Does anyone know this term? But essentially a leader ender. And we use it like a little leader ender as I'm teaching everyone all the buttons on the sewing machine. Because sip and sews are predominantly folks who are not already sewists. And even folks who are may not be familiar with our machines. So I always just do a little tour of buttons with those extra fabrics. All right, same thing here. I'm going to hit this with the iron again because we're getting a little wobbly. And I've done a lot of these pretty similar in width. If for any reason you wanted, I need a green in my life. You wanted to, you could make these skinnier, right? I think I'm mostly working with like 1 and 2 inch strips. But if I take our triangle that I'm going to cut later, right? Depending on the effect that you want, you could always go narrower or wider. Thread bunny, I have not heard that one. I like that. Thread bunny is cuter than thread pig. It was definitely pig that someone said one time. And I was like, what now? We had a really good laugh about it. We all thought it was really funny. But thread bunny is cute. I like that. That makes me think about in running when there's a pacer. Sometimes the pacer is called a rabbit. All right. I'm just keeping an eye on the comments to make sure. So Helen, I did not bring my stitches down quite that far this time. So I am at around a 2. If I am foundation paper piecing on printer paper, I'll bring it down to about a 1.8. Anything smaller than that, I find really difficult to pick out, which on this, we're not going to pick it out. We would probably just start over, right? I can't imagine a scenario that would even require the starting over, but if we needed to, we probably would not pick this. We would just move along and not use that piece, right? But on this, I'm using a 2 because this paper is really, really thin. And if I perforate it too much, it'll be coming apart before I even finish sewing with it. So just adjust your stitch length based on how thick your paper is. And the thicker paper will need a smaller stitch length to kind of do a little bit more damage to it. But if you've got a really thin paper like this, you're not going to need to shorten it up a whole ton. It's gonna peel off nicely. And we're not going to peel the paper off the back of this until it's in a block, right? We're going to leave that paper on to hold those bias edges stable. Until pretty far into this project. Yeah, great. Oh, you still want a 2 normally. I still want like a 2.5 normally. So I love that. Yeah, that's kind of the gist of my thought process on stitch length. Now I'm going to take my template and I'm going to see, do I need this last strip? No, I don't. Okay. Because we're obviously not going to get another full triangle. So I'm going to hit this one more time with an iron. Then we're going to talk about how to cut this. In an ideal world, this would be a longer piece of paper, right? Like I would have a longer piece of paper that I could cut a whole bunch of triangles at a time. But in reality, I'm going to get like 2 at a time out of this, okay? And I'm going to use the straight edge of my ruler and I'm going to trim off the rest of the edges I'm going to tilt y'all down again so you can see. And I agree. This is a great project for scraps. Whether you're just using it for these little triangles, or you could use scraps really for the whole quilt. It can be very tonal, very scrappy. A lot could be going on. All right, I'm going to tilt this down so y'all can see. I'm just going to trim off all this extra fabric along the edge here before we go to cut our triangles. Now, I already cut my paper to be exactly the height I want for my triangle, so I don't want to trim any paper off, okay? And then, hopefully y'all can see over here on Instagram. Let me figure out the best way to position this for y'all. I'm going to tilt y'all slightly more. Hold, please. Whee! Just ever so slightly. Because I don't want it to get lost down in the bottom here. Okay, perfect. Now y'all can see. Taking my tri-tool. Da-da-da-da. Line up the bottom edge on the bottom, top edge on the top. And cut. Remember what we said, move your body out of the way. There we go. This is Scrippy Scrap. Look how cute that is. So cute, right? And then we're going to do the other one the exact same way. So take your template, cartwheel it. Hold it still so you actually cut right on the edge of the template. There we go. And what's fun about this is that no two of those triangles are going to be the same, right? And it's just going to add this fun little pop to what you're working on. Like I said, if you have longer paper so that you don't have quite as much waste like this down at the edge, awesome. If not, these shorter pieces of paper, even printer paper will work. If you do not use paper, if you're like, man, having to only work like a few at a time, that sounds kind of bogus, then just make sure that you alternate which way you sew in order to reduce the distortion that you're going to get as you're going along, okay? I'm just leaning over here to adjust Instagram a little bit. All right? Thank you, Debbie. I appreciate that. Any questions about this? While y'all type, I'm going to grab a couple of, here, we'll grab some pink triangles. And I'm going to lay this out so you can get an idea of what this is going to look like in a block. And we're going to officially do this next week. But this will give you an idea. Let's see if I can lay this out the correct way on the first try. I'll do that one. There we go. So then, let me tilt this out so y'all can see. So you can see how we're going to end up with our hexagon block, and we're going to have that little pop here in the center. Now I'm using all solids. So right now, this looks a little flat, but that's where our quilting is going to come in, right? First of all the different colors, it's going to sparkle as a whole, even though each block, you're like, that's a lot of one color. Second, we're going to add a lot of pizzazz with our quilting when that time comes. And that's going to add that extra little texture. Third, if you are using, prints, then some of y'all have already been laying those out and you know exactly how sparkly that can make these blocks. So I'm really excited to see this come together in solids for the first time. I really want to add more jazz to it with my quilting. I have some ideas already for custom quilting. Yeah, but those of you who are doing it with prints, you'll be able to do a little bit simpler quilting and still have that same sparkly effect. So there you have it, folks, a very basic introduction to some foundation paper piecing. This is a perfect jumping off point. If FPP is something that's on your wish list, something you're wanting to learn, but you want to kind of put your toe in the water and just get a feel for handling the paper and cutting through the paper and all of those things. And then my next step I would recommend for you, if you're curious about that, would be doing some like simple economy blocks with our Confident FPP workbook. Leave those papers in for now. And next week, we're going to talk about how to piece these blocks together and start to see this quilt top come to life. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will see y'all back next week.